There are just two fundamental rules of enemy movement. The first rule is, enemies will always attempt to move the shortest distance to be adjacent to their target. In this example, the giant rat can reach the ranger with just 3 hexes of movement. We'll need the second movement rule to figure out which path he takes, but we already know that it won't use more than 3 hexes of movement because this rule never gets broken. Now, before I move on to the second movement rule, I'll point out that in some situations, the first rule may be the only one you need. For example, if the enemy is in a straight, unobstructed line with its target, then it will move along that line simply because that's the shortest path to reach its target. Any other path you consider will be longer than that one. More commonly though, there'll be several different paths which are equally short, and that's where the next movement rule comes in. If there's a choice of multiple shortest paths, use the rule of north then west to determine the next hex in the path. When you combine these two movement rules, you can figure out exactly where an enemy will move in any situation. Let's look at some examples. Here, the enemy can reach its target with just 1 hex of movement, and the golden rule tells us to choose the northernmost hex. Simple. Here the enemy will need to move 2 hexes to reach the priest, and there are 3 possible paths it could take. The rule of north then west tells us that for his very first step, the enemy will choose this hex because it's further north than the alternative, so he takes this path. With the enemy a bit further away from its target, like this, there may be quite a few paths which are equally short. And although there's only one correct path, there may be different techniques to help you find it. For example, you might calculate the path 1 step at a time. Provided every step reduces the distance to the target and follows the golden rule if there's a choice, then you'll get the correct path. Alternatively, you may start to recognize common patterns. In this example, I can see the first step will be either here or here, and the rule of north then west tells me to choose the northernmost hex. And because there are no obstacles or characters in the way, I know it will continue in the same direction until it reaches a straight line to the target and moves along it. That's a pretty common pattern which emerges from the movement rules. I sometimes find it helpful to visualize the straight lines radiating from a target because when they're unobstructed, they act like a conveyor belt. If an enemy hits one, they'll move along it. But feel free to use whatever approach makes sense to you. Maybe you'll spot patterns of your own. In later videos, we'll see more examples of these movement rules being used by both normal size enemies and large enemies.